Hello guys, it's me Aradha Gopal Nepal and this is my one of the most complicated video of this series because in this video I'm going to explain the authentication and authorization flow on my application which I've done. So for explaining this I need to explain these kind of configs which I've used in my application, and also I need to explain the login controller. Okay, so regarding authentication, this is the authentication which I have used in my application. So as you can see on the Swagger, this is the login API, and if I click try it out and enter the email yopmail.com and test at rate 123. Oops, sorry, my account was blocked because I will explain this after some time in the same video. But for that, look at this. After I get successfully authenticated in my application, I will get this kind of response. And this is the access token which I'm getting. If I go to jdot.io, IO, IO, and the code is these are the response we are with these are the information which are decoded inside this access token, and this is the refresh token. So this is the authentication flow in my application, and after I get this token, I will authorize my this user API using this button, authorize, and it's get authorized. If I if I run this API without being authorized, I will get this 403 exception. But if I run this login API without getting authorized, I get none of the 403 exception. And in this video, I am going to explain how I have handled all of these scenarios in my application. So let's get started. No, 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 no. I'm just a poor boy. Nobody loves me. So guys, thanks for watching my intro. So this is the method signature for the login API. If you look into the entire controller, this is the login controller, and this login controller uses this API, and it's a REST controller. And for dependency injection, I've used required all args constructor. Since this auth service is annotated with service annotation, I can get the object of this service from constructor dependency injection using this annotation of Spring. And look, and in this API, the login API, the login method or the login API is a post method of this same API of the controller. Okay, I haven't done some value. So login. I haven't done this kind of thing because if I had done this, the login API would look something like this. Login, after that again another login. But that's not what I've done. I've created this for login, and in a response it is throwing our authenticated response which returns us access token and refresh token. This is the response which we just have seen here. Okay, this response access token, refresh token, and in the request it is asking for email and password. Okay, we are asking this in body. Since it's a post API, we can ask some data in body, and we are doing valid check of Spring Boot. So for email there is two kind of check. The email must not be empty and email must be email. Spring have its own definition of email, so I don't have to do anything. So the main thing to note in this code is that in password I haven't done any validation. So if you look into set password request, in password I check this regex that password must have one lowercase, one uppercase. It must be eight letters long. It must have a special symbol and a numerical values. But for login request, I haven't checked any kind of this validation because what happens is that our application might have users which are migrated from old system, and in that old system user had no validation. So in AY, ABCDEF app version 1, there was no this kind of password requirement, and I have registered my account as 12345. But suddenly, new updates of ABCDEFG came, and now I need to enter a secure password. But the problem what occurs is that I have already set unsecure password, and I'm not allowed to log in my application. Okay, this is annoying. Instead it is better that first allow user to log in. After user login, then ask them to, hey, your password is unsecure, or you need to change your password to continue using this app. I think this is a better approach. That's why in login I'm not in checking whether email and password is correct. In authentication, I haven't done used strong password regex, but in setting up the password, I've used the strong password regex, so that when the user try to set password for the first time, or they try to update the password, only a strong password get updated into our system. So this is the method signature of our login API, and it throws our custom exception, which I already explained in many videos. Just simple exception which get handled from this custom exception handler, and then it in message it return this if it's successfully authenticated, and it does this kind of inner calculation in this service layer. The API of login passport is actually quite big, and I need to explain it one by one. So be with me and let's get started. As you can see, in service layer, the tags, the method the login returns authenticated response, and in response it asks for login request. After that, after that, at first it finds the user, the normal flow which we have done in many codes. But this finding user was actually not that necessary, because if we look here, we are using Spring Boot and authenticate method in order to authenticate user into our application, and this method is username password authentication token. So this is the Spring Boot implementation of authentication, and this specific implementation requires us to enter email and password in order to get authenticated. It is using Auth Manager, and if we go inside Auth Manager, we found an interface class. So Spring Boot interface class is used for low coupling design pattern, where we create a interface class. All of the internal coding of Spring Boot calls the interface class, but when me as a developer wants to implement my own personal implementation, I just implement this authentication method manager and enter my own implementation and provide this implementation to the Spring Boot using some kind of bean. Okay, so this is the contract which Spring Boot use to create their code. And so this is lots of implementation which we have implemented, like we got user detail service implementation. This implementation is used, okay guys, in authentication. Spring Boot have lots of complex thing. Okay, Authentic Spring Security. So Spring Boot have uh this diagram is better, I think. Spring Boot have a lots of mechanism to do the security. It got authentication manager, it got authentication provider, it got authentication filter, and all of these are just an interface so that we can just implement them instead of writing our own flow. We use the Spring Boot flow, but we implement our own implementation on that same flow. For that, we need to provide bean to Spring Boot. So there is a user service, user detail service bean. This bean provides user details from the username. Since the user details service interface have only one method, we don't need to do something like this. So we could have also done this class user details service implements user detail, and we could have load user by this blah blah blah. Since this class have only one method, we can just do something like this, okay, to implement the our own personal implementation. Similarly, Spring Boot have authentication provider, and this is the authentication provider we are using. In authentication provider we are finding sending this password this, and we got our password encoder, we got our pass manager. So this all code I copied from internet, but using this code we are getting all of these fields. Okay, I will explain JWT service. So password encoder comes from here. This password encoder, JWT service, I will explain later. Authentication manager I just explained. So these are the fields. So authenticate is a Spring Boot flow, and we have implemented our own authentication, and using Spring Boot flow and our own implementation, we are calling the authenticate method and passing username and password, and using these details Spring Boot authenticate. If it is authenticated, we do some of the tasks which I will explain later. But if it is not authenticated, that means the credential that user entered is incorrect, then we are throwing this error invalid credential to the user. Okay, if we go here, so we will what we're doing that if user successfully logged in, we remove any blockage the user have. So in this table, in this database, so user have a field name wrong attempts and it's blocked till. Every time a user enter wrong email and password, if I enter wrong email password in this other two, so look, other two will come wrong attempts one. If I keep doing wrong, my wrong attempts keeps on increasing, but once I do correct, I get the data and my wrong attempts is also resetted to zero. So this is the code which is doing it. I've explained this previously in many videos, and then we generate access and refresh token and sends it to the response. As we can see here, we are getting access and refresh token. The inner code of access and refresh token is I think not explained. I will explain the refresh token concept also at the later part of this video, or I believe that I will explain the refresh token in the next video where I'm explaining JW token, refresh token in general. Okay, auth service. So these are the some of the exception handling we have done, and all of these exception are catched in this method. authentication exception, custom exception. Sometimes my code makes me question myself how things are working. Okay, so let's get inside the authentication exception and see what is happening. If you can see this extra flag, it's null. Let's what let's do one thing, that register a new user. Aradhya Nepal, Aradhya 5 at the rate loopmail.com, 18 mail. So we have just registered a new user, and if you can see, if we register a new user, other 5 at loopmail.com, initially the password of the user will be null because they have only registered it, they haven't done set password. In this scenario, on the model name, on the our user entity table, there is two implementation of Spring Boot, that is each account non-blocked. Being this false means the user is blocked and another is enabled. Each being disabled means the user haven't set their password yet. In this scenario, we are doing something like this. So if a user registration is not complete, we are sending front end this message: your account setup isn't completed yet, due to which your account is currently disabled. So let's say I try to log in using RD5. I will get this response. Okay, your account setup isn't complete, due to which your account is currently disabled. But I also need to pass some kind of extra flag so that the front end guy can handle the scenario. Okay, if account is not registered in front end, they must show user and dialog box, click continue to register. So front end guy needs some flags so that if this flag is true, then show a dialog box that registration is not complete. Do you want to continue to the registration process? Due to which I am sending this flag. I might change the for format in which this flag is being sent, but for now it is what it's being done. And I found that the account is disabled using this disabled exception, which is a exception used in Spring Boot itself. So internally Spring Boot uses this exception when the user account is disabled. Similarly, if I try to log in user to using wrong credential for lots of time, 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, and boom, I will get this kind of exception. Your account has been locked for few hours. It might be due to lots of wrong attempts. I'm assuming this exception because for either two, it's blocked till uh, today's night. So for 12 hour, my account has been blocked, and this check ensure that I got this message. Your account has been locked for it might be due to the lots of wrong attempts. And similarly, if I got bad credential, then I will return this invalid username or password. So in this way, I have checked and written proper message in these scenarios. If I haven't done these kind of things, Spring Boot have returned its own implementation, its own message which was not that friendly. Let's say if account is disabled, Spring Boot have returned account is disabled, and user might get confused why my account is disabled. So due to which I have, done some modification, and finally here is a code to block user if any of these bad things happens. Okay, if user try to do bad things for lots of time, their account will be get blocked, and I've already explained nearly all code which is happening here, so I don't need to explain it again. And one thing to note is that in most of the scenario, I am returning forbidden exception if anything went wrong in login API, because login API, anything going bad either means that there is internal server error, or there is some authentication related issue. That's why I'm returning the status code 403, and this is my login API. At the end of this login API, I will get this token. I got no account, but I've already shown that I will get an access token and refresh token after I successfully log in my application. Okay, let's update table fitness. So guys, I am not a backend specialist, so I might make mistakes. Set is block till is equal to null, where id is equal to id equal to. So if I run this code, I'm getting this response. Oh, sorry. One thing I so this response, and with this response, it means that we are successfully authenticated to our system. Spring Boot has successfully found that the credential which I provided to Spring Boot actually belongs to our system, and it have provided an access token so that we can continue our process. I will explain the concept of access token, refresh token. I will explain this. Okay, I will explain this JWT service, this refresh token service, and this refresh token API in next video, how it's internally working. But for now, just understand that I'm successfully authenticated in our system, and I got some keys, some credentials, so that I can continue my further flow. Now, now continue the authorization. So this is the exception. Okay, I will not explain this. Continuing authorization, I'm going to explain these three code. At first, there is JWT authentication filter. What? So some of you who are confused what filter is, you can watch this API. So for every request and response a user hit in our system, it have to go to the security filter chain which Spring Boot have. So if I hit this login API, no matter whether I hit login API or get user details API, whichever controller I hit, before our Spring Boot going inside the code of this controller, it have to go through the security filter. And as you can see in the code, this is the security filter which I have in my application, and it is asking for authorization header. What does it means that after we successfully get authenticated in our system, in every request we hit, in every request we hit in a header, we passes this authorization header with this bearer and this token which we just get. And this filter which run before every API checks the authorization header, and it will check whether the token is expired or not. If it is not expired, it will load user. So this is authentication. Okay, what is authentication is identifying the user from our table, and we have identified the user from our table, and the user is valid, everything. This is authentication. And once we identify the table, we set the user inside our context. So what is security context holder is that I will draw a diagram. So this is our filter. This is our controller. Guys, yeah, controller. This is our controller, and this is our filter. So this is our filter, this is our controller, and every time an API hits a request, so let's imagine at context is, what is context? Context. Wait, okay, I got some notification that mobile is too far. So context, office time. So context is data on. I will explain. Context is data inside RAM, random access memory at a specific moment of time. So our server is running for 1 hour at a, at 35 minute 10 second in the value of true, the value of each value equal to true. So there are lots of variables in our application, and at a particular moment of time, the value of a specific variable is a true. That's called context. But the problem is in Spring Boot, multiple request is being hit at the same time. So in this scenario, what context is that? Let's say there are three requests being hit in our application. What happens is that in this is three requests, and in this both all of the requests are being hit in 10:30, 10:30, and at the exact same time. Okay, and for every request, Spring Boot create a separate thread, and that separate thread is something that all of the thread does not share the same memory resources with each other. Okay, this thread runs on separate memory on the RAM. This thread run on the separate memory on the RAM, and this thread run on the separate memory on the RAM. And what context is that at a particular moment of time, the value of each authenticated is true for this user, whereas it's false for this user, and it's false for this user. So this is a context. At a specific moment of time for a specific thread, the value of is authenticated is true, because after 11:30, the value of it is authenticate could be false, because at that time for that specific thread, if that thread is a long running thread, the user might be unauthenticated from our system. And this is what context is. And once all of the authentication, identifying the user from our table and verifying the JWT token is valid or not, after doing all of this thing, this JWT authentication filter, which runs on every before every before which run the first time any request is being hit on our system, this filter ships the authentication details on its context. And what does it means that this authentication details, so this authentication details is available for this thread at that specific moment of time. So whenever, what is authentication detail? It is about the details of the user, the identity of the user is available on every place on that thread. So whether you are on login service, whether you are on register service, whether you are on home service, if you want to find the details of the user which is authenticated, you can use the context and fetch it up because it is accessible everywhere in that particular thread at that particular time. So, and that's what we are doing. We are setting the context token, and if we need to access this token, we can do something like this: uh, service, user service, and we can do something like this. So look, if we are on the same thread and at the same particular moment of time, then the value we save here can be accessed from here without any dependency injection. Okay, so this is also one kind of dependency. It is not a dependency injection, it is a kind of data injection, but without any constructor, without passing this value or token in the constructor of this class, we can access the data in any code or of our application. So if I need user, I can access something like this, and in service I can do some of the calculation. And okay, this is what I am doing here. So this is what the context and JWT authentication filter do in our application. Then another thing which I need to show to you is security configuration. So this is one of the once we implement Spring Security and we run our application for the first time, what I found was that there was just a login script where I need to enter username and password. If we do no security configuration, that then Spring Boot will ask the default. Okay, let's remove this. Okay, I got compile time error. If I remove this, Spring Boot will use its default implementation for security because, okay guys, because I got this in my system, Spring Security, and once I start Spring Security, whenever I run this code, the Spring Boot application have two kind of annotation and this will auto enable the configuration which Spring Security have, that is make user to ask for authentication details. Okay, let's try it. Okay, for now just remove this because this is being redundant. Here also I'm creating a pin and here also I'm creating a pin. Let's remove all of these things. So this is the authentication provider which we are using, and we are using pass username and password authentication provider and authentication manager. Let's remove these two code. If it still not work, I will give up because I need to remove lots of setup which I need to do. Okay, just ignore it. Just one thing I need to do is that if you don't do this kind of setups, then Spring Boot will ask username and password in your front end the moment you add Spring security in build.gradle and run the elephant, the Gradle. But I've implemented my own implementation here, the authentication manager, the authentication provider. So now my app will ask username and password authentication, and I've done some of the configuration for the security that is, I don't know what this is. My API is stateless. I'm using this authentication provider. I'm adding this JWT filter which we discussed previously, and so two things which I need to explain is the concept of stateless. Okay, so what is stateful? So what is stateful is that, let's say there is a server and there is a web. So whenever a web authenticate in the server, a session is created between web and server. What is session? Is a session is a some of the credentials which is stored in the database of the server. Like this session number one belongs to web, which is running on device D. So guys, just sorry for disturbance. I just went outside and come inside. So I was in stateful, and this is stateful. Okay, there is a session created between server and web. Whenever web goes out, this session get closed, or some of the different scenario, I don't know. So actually I am a mobile developer, and in mobile there is mobile cannot have stateless. Sorry, this is stateless. Okay, this is stateful. In mobile it is always stateless. What does it means that, okay, this is a server, this is a mobile. When a mobile to authentication in server, it will get a token, a bearer token from the server. What does a bearer token is means that whoever have this token can authenticate and authorize into this server. So this bearer token is very sensitive, because if this bearer token get lost and someone ill access it, they can authenticate and authorize into our system and misuse the resources which is accessible to that specific user who logged in from the mobile to the server. And another thing about stateless is that, let's say, let me have a eraser. Where the eraser? This is eraser. I put it white. It will become an eraser. White, white, white. What kind of dustbin it is here? If I make it white, it is an eraser. Let's- So what is, let's say, in one API, in API 1, I have done verify OTP. OTP, and in second API I have done set password. So I'm the same mobile and I'm hitting verify OTP, and just after hitting verify OTP I am hitting set passwords, but I'm the same guy. I know that I am the same guy who is hitting two API one by one, but the server cannot know that the same guy hit the API. It could be some, so OTP could be 12345 123. I could have verified this 123 OTP, and then when I am trying to set password, there could be some hacker who trying to set password, and servers thinks that the OTP of this user a@b.com is verified, so it will allow to set password. So this kind of things might happens in stateless communication. That's why even I have already sent 1 to 3 OTP in verify OTP. In set password also, I am supposed to send 1 to 3 OTP to set password so that the server can re-verify that I am the valid user who is accessing the resources. Or in verify OTP, it must send me some kind of ref ID in order to do the re-verification process. So this is what stateless communication is. Okay. Also, it also means that after I successfully log in, I get a bearer token, and now using that every time. Okay, after I do login, in response I got a bearer token, and now every time I do a new request on the server cannot know that I am the same user who just get that bearer token. Every time we need to pass the bearer token in authorization header again and again so that the server can authenticate us. After authenticating, authorize us regarding which resources is accessible to me. And regarding authorization, you can see here fitness folks. This is okay. Authorities, which is what authorities I got, and based on these authorities, for now I am allowing all of the requests who have authorities user to access the resource. But in future there might be scenarios like there might be an API user slash, there might be another API admin slash, and there might be scenario that only user can access this API and only admin can access this API. In this scenario, I need authorization. I am already authenticated using this JWT filter. Now the context of Spring Boot on a specific thread at a specific time knows that the current user is ABCDEFG. Now using this authorization, it checks whether ABCDEFG is of what role and he or she is capable of accessing this specific API or not. So this is what authorization is, and some of you might be wondering what I've done here. So let me just remove this and run the server again. Now if I try to go into this login API and try to do execution, right now I want to authenticate into our stateless server. I want to get a bearer token from our stateless server, and I have entered the correct username and password, but despite that I am getting this follow 3 exception that is unauthorized. Just imagine you are trying to do login, and so what this error denotes is that even in login the security filter context, this JWT authentication filter is asking us to have this authorization, but this is not possible in login API, yeah, right? Because in login API it's hit in order to get the bearer token, but in login API itself it's asking a bearer token. It's like, in order to get job you need experience, what in order to get experience you need job. This kind of loop is happening in our code. For that, not only that, okay, if I refresh this API, even my Swagger is not being accessible because in order to open Swagger also I need the bearer token. Okay, this code must be true, and some of the detail must be saved inside security context in order for me to get logged in Swagger, but this is not possible because Swagger and nearly all of the API feature auth controller. So this forgot password API which have auth, this login controller which have auth, this register controller which have auth, and the Swagger are types of API which does not have any bearer token, and they are supposed to be open. Due to this reason, we have set uh, this. Okay, if the API is this or any of the auth API, any of the Swagger API, or in my application, this is not required. This is actually if there's some image in my application which I want to be available to the front end openly, but right now in my application there is no images, so I just removed that. So in any of these API, I don't need any bearer token on the header in order to access these, and this kind of rule is set in this authorized. So these APIs needs no authorization in order to access these resources, but these API needs user authorization. In future I will let user admin. So this is the authorization, okay, knowing whether a specific resource can be granted to a specific user or not. This resource can be granted to any of the anonymous user. So this is what this is open API. This is API which is only granted by user. I can create a API which is only granted for admin. So this is, but even after doing this, if I just after doing this, I am able to see interface like this. I am able to do try it out. So I am able to get the access token, and for the sake of knowledge, the expiry of access token is 25/11 already expired. This access token already expired. Copy. What is happening? Execute. I got the access token. Guys, something wrong happening. Every time I try to authorize, I am getting the same access token. Okay, sorry guys. The expiry of this token is 15 minutes. Since in this security filter we are checking the expiry is token valid. I will explain this code later. This token is only accessible. This token can only be used for 15 minutes in order to access any of the resources which have authentication, like user. In order to authorize, look, I'm using Swagger. If I remove this, and in user also, if I remove this, so I've removed, some of the configuration which I've done for user, but problem arrived in that is that in Swagger, I cannot access any API. Okay, I mean I could have opened Postman, but I want to provide documentation of my system using Swagger in my system. That is my requirement. The, in order to do the Swagger setup, I have first copy pasted this code from internet. You know, for scheme this for these things, I have created an Swagger configuration. The name of the configuration is authorization 1 to 3. Now on user controller I have set authorization 1 to 3 as security requirement. If I don't do this and run this, then what happens is that I could have also done this annotation. Okay, I forgot. I forgot. Leave it. If I don't do it, what happens? So right now I've only set this swagger configuration, but I haven't set the security requirement in the user controller. If I do this, what happens is that I will get this authorize button. I can I can copy this token and authorize my API. But when I hit the user request in header, the the authorization I have done is not being passed in this API because right now we are working on Swagger configuration. In Swagger website we have authenticated. What we are not saying Swagger that for this API use the authentication authorization which we have done, due to which we are getting this error to solve. We need to set this and note that this name is the name which we have done here. If I do this, we can run something like this. And now if I execute, now if I authorize, try it out, execute, and authorization, I am getting this. It's basically working. There's some other error. So guys, just wait. Okay, let me uncomment this. So okay, in this way, I have explained the Swagger configuration which I have done to make this APIs authorized. The last thing I wanna show is this custom exception handler. I think I've already explained it. I forgot it, but I will try to explain it again because this is very simple. Look, we got the user details, and using this user controller security requirement, Swagger knows that what authorization we have done here, we must pass this authorization in the header of this user controller, any API which belongs to user controller. In this way, we have done setup of authorization, and user is successfully being authorized. For now, any role which is user can access any API. But again, I've already said that let's say there was, let's say admin. What does this mean is that in order to access any API other than this, my role must be admin. If I rerun the application because I just changed the code, if I execute again, then I'm getting this exception 403. What does it means that from the security filter, user is successfully authenticated in our system. Now our system knows that the user which is trying to do login is valid and they have role user. So it's not that the user is invalid, the user is absolutely valid, the authentication is successful. But but the thing is user is trying to access this API, and this API is only made for this role authorization. User is valid, but they are not authorized to use any API any API except these, due to which we are getting this exception. And this is the difference between authentication, identifying a user in our system, and authorization, or deciding whether to allow a specific resources to a user or not based on their ID, based on their role, based on their lots of details, the privileges they got. So this is the difference between authorization and authentication. Before ending this video, I will explain a short about my this custom exception handler. If I remove this custom exception handler and rerun a application, and if I try to log in and I enter wrong details, ardsy@gmail, yopmail.com, test, I will go get no response. And this is so annoying because let's say the current user is blocked, and when I hit, I'm still at 403. How a front-end guy is supposed to know that whether this user have entered an invalid credential or user is actually blocked? The backend must send some message to the front end. But in my setup, what I have done is that whenever there is some error on some code, I am throwing this custom exception. And the same way, there is a valid annotation of Spring Boot, and we have set some of the validation requirement which this email must fulfill. If we pass nothing and execute, is may have been hang. It is still throwing nothing. Okay. Due to this, we cannot know what is happening in our code. We need this custom exception handler, and there are two handler. First is method arguments not valid exception, which is the exception which happens when this valid tag valid annotation is placed on a controller's method and the request is not valid due to this annotation. Okay, if I run again, and the point to note is that one thing to note is that my generic response entity have generic response which have entity have this generic response which have list of error. It returns error in a list, due to which, let's say I enter any wrong details, I will get list of error. I said two things wrong, that's why I am getting list of error, and this is what handles this kind of things. It loops the list, do some processing and convert to it a list, and returns the list of string. Whereas if there is some custom exception, I will not get list of error. I will instead get a message, one message, extra flag, and status. I am sending that in this format. Let's say user entered this, they will get your account is blocked. Okay, only one message. Just the front end guy, they always know the error comes in errors map, and it could be list or single. So they just need to join all of the item on the list and show to the users. So this is a scenario when there is invalid password, and there's a special scenario where registration not complete, an extra flag is being returned from error response. This is being handled from this extra flag which is on this custom exception as well as in generic response. Okay, generic response have no custom exception. Oh, the data itself is a custom, some extra flag on the exception. So if you put any extra details on custom exception, if you put any extra flags, this flag will be mapped into data and will be sent inside data. Since the status code is 403, front-end guy is supposed to know that any data which comes inside a data when the status code is a 403 is a error data, and they have to handle it is at an error. So this is all of this setup. So in this video I've explained authentication, authorization, and custom handler exception in my application. Thanks for watching. This video will be a long time, so let's meet on next video where I will explain access token, refresh token, and how I have used refresh token in my application. Thanks for watching, and let's meet on the final video tomorrow of this authentication setup on my shifting fitness project. Thank you.